My son squeezed my hand twice under the dinner table, and I almost didn't feel it. We were sitting at my sister Patrice's house in Columbus, her dining room, the one with the yellow wallpaper she's been meaning to replace since 2019, and there were 8 of us crowded around a table built for 6. My son was to my left. His girlfriend, the one he'd been seeing for 7 months, was across from him. Her name was Simone. I almost didn't feel it because I was reaching for the breadbasket at the same moment. But I felt it. 2 quick squeezes. Deliberate, with the knuckle of his index finger pressing into the back of my hand. Not a nervous fidget. Not an accident. It was the signal. We made it up when he was 11 years old. Let me back up, because context matters here, and I don't want to skip over the part that explains why 2 squeezes meant what they meant. My son's name is Joel. He's 26 now, works in logistics for a distribution company outside of Cincinnati, drives a sensible car, calls me every Sunday. When he was 11, his mother and I separated. It wasn't ugly the way some divorces are ugly. No lawyers screaming at each other, no one throwing dishes. But it was hard in the way that quiet things are hard. We sold the house in Dayton. I moved into an apartment on the other side of town. Joel went back and forth on a schedule that I'm sure looked reasonable on paper and felt completely disorienting for an 11-year-old boy. There was a period, about 8 months into it, where he started getting quiet in ways that worried me. Not sad quiet, more like watchful quiet, like he was paying attention to everything and processing none of it out loud. One evening, I picked him up from his mother's and we went to get pizza. Just the 2 of us, a Friday ritual we'd started, and partway through the meal he looked at me and said, completely out of nowhere, "Dad, what if I ever need to tell you something's wrong but I can't say it?" I remember putting down my slice. I remember looking at him. I said, "What do you mean?" He shrugged the way 11-year-olds shrug when they're trying to seem casual about something that isn't casual, like in front of people. What if something's wrong and I can't just say it? I don't know if it was a specific situation he was imagining or just the general anxiety of a kid whose life had recently been rearranged without his input. I didn't push. I just said, "Then we make a signal." We agreed on 2 squeezes, 2 deliberate squeezes on the hand or the arm if we were close enough to touch. It meant, something is wrong. I need you to pay attention. Don't react yet. Just know, we used it once when he was 13, at a Christmas party at his grandmother's, where a man he didn't know kept cornering him to talk. I got him out of there in under 4 minutes without making a scene. He never told me exactly what made him uncomfortable, but he didn't have to. The signal was enough. He's 26 now. I had not felt those 2 squeezes in 15 years. Simone had been dating Joel for 7 months when he brought her to meet the extended family at Patrice's house. My sister likes to host. She does Thanksgiving, she does Easter, she does the occasional random Saturday dinner that she promotes like it's an event. This one was a Saturday in March, a birthday dinner for my mother who had just turned 72. I'd heard about Simone in pieces. She was 30, a few years older than Joel. She'd grown up in Atlanta, moved to Cincinnati for a job in marketing, and she and Joel had met at a friend's housewarming party. He'd mentioned her carefully, the way people mention someone they don't want to jinx. The first time he said her name on one of our Sunday calls, he said it once and then moved on quickly, like he was testing whether I'd make a big deal out of it. I didn't. I just asked what she was like, and he said, "She's smart. She's really funny. She knows what she wants." He paused and then added, "She's ambitious." And I remember thinking, at the time, that the way he said it was slightly different from the rest of the sentence, like he was including it because he thought he should. When I finally met her, she was charming. There's no other word for it. She walked into Patrice's house and she worked the room the way experienced people work rooms. Not aggressively, not obviously, but effectively. She complimented my mother on her blouse. She helped carry dishes without being asked. She laughed at my brother-in-law's jokes with exactly enough enthusiasm. She knew the names of everyone in the room by the end of the first hour, and I watched her use those names deliberately, personally, like she'd known us for years. She was good. I'm going to say that again because I want to be clear. She was good at it. And I'm not someone who misses things. I spent 22 years as a licensed clinical social worker, the last 11 of those in private practice. My entire job has been reading people, not just what they say, but what they're careful not to say and why. I've sat across from people in crisis. I've sat across from people who were performing stability they didn't feel. I've sat across from manipulators who didn't know I knew what they were doing. Simone didn't trigger anything specific in me during that first hour. I'm being honest about that. She just seemed like a confident, personable woman who was making a good impression. The thing that caught my attention was small. It was a comment she made about Joel's apartment. We were at the table, somewhere between the salad and the main course, and the conversation had drifted to the neighborhood Joel had recently moved to. Simone said something about how she'd encouraged him to upgrade, nicer building, better location, closer to downtown. Joel nodded along. My mother asked what the rent was like, and before Joel could answer, Simone said, "Oh, he got a great rate. He's been really smart about his finances. He's got money put away that most people his age don't." Joel didn't say anything. He reached for his water glass. My brother-in-law asked about the neighborhood parking situation, and the conversation moved on. I stayed with it for a second longer than everyone else, not because of what she said. It wasn't alarming on its own, but because of how Joel looked when she said it. He didn't look proud. He looked like he'd stepped on something unexpected and was trying to figure out whether to acknowledge it. 2 minutes later, I felt the two squeezes. I didn't react. That was always part of the agreement. The signal didn't mean panic. It meant pay attention. I kept eating. I laughed at the next thing someone said. I asked my mother about her garden plans for spring. I passed the bread when it came around again, but I was watching. What I noticed over the next 45 minutes, Simone referred to Joel's finances 2 more times. Not clumsily, not in a way anyone else would flag as unusual. Once in passing, when she mentioned they'd been talking about taking a real trip this year, not just a weekend thing. And once when she asked my mother, warmly, conversationally, whether my mother had her accounts at a credit union or a traditional bank. My mother, who is 72 and from a generation that answers direct questions directly, told her. Simone said, "I love that. Joel's actually been thinking about moving some savings around. It's so smart to diversify." Joel said, "Simone." She said, "What?" "I'm just saying," and she squeezed his arm. It looked affectionate. It looked like a couple's shorthand. I've seen that move before. In my professional life, a small correction is offered. The correction is minimized as uptightness. Affection is used to close the loop. The person being corrected ends up feeling like they're the problem. After dinner, my sister brought out my mother's birthday cake, a lemon cake from the bakery on 5th that my mother has loved since before I was born. And while everyone was singing, I leaned slightly toward Joel and said quietly, "Are you okay?" He said, "Yeah, of course." He didn't look at me when he said it. They left around 9. I stayed to help Patrice clean up, which I always do, and which gives us time to talk. Patrice had noticed less than I had. She'd been in and out of the kitchen most of the evening, but she said unprompted, "She's very polished." "Yes," I said. "That's not necessarily a bad thing," she said. "No," I said. "It's not," but I was already running through what I'd observed, organizing it the way I organize things, not jumping to conclusions, but not dismissing data either. A woman who consistently steered conversation toward her boyfriend's financial situation, who gathered specific information from his family members, who managed minor corrections from him in a way that made him the problem, who had, at some point in the past 7 months, gotten detailed enough into my son's finances that she could reference his savings to near strangers. I called Joel the next day. Not about Simone. I called the way I always called, just checking in. He sounded tired. I asked if work was busy. He said yes. I asked if everything was okay otherwise. He said yes. Then he said, "Simone thought the dinner went really well." I said, "It was good to meet her." Then I said carefully, "Hey, do you remember the signal?" A pause. Not a long one. "Yeah," he said. I said, "You used it last night." Another pause. "Longer this time, Dad, he said. You used it last night. Another pause. Longer this time. Dad, he said. I'm not asking you to explain anything right now, I said. I just want you to know I felt it, and I'm here when you're ready. He said, okay. His voice was flat in a way that meant he was working to keep it flat. Okay, I said, and I let it go for the moment. He called me 11 days later. It was a Tuesday night, almost 10 o'clock, which is late for Joel. He said, "Can I talk to you about something?" I said, "Of course." He told me that Simone had, over the course of 6 months, borrowed money from him 4 times. Not asked, that's the word he used, and I paid attention to it. Asked implies equal footing. Borrowed implies repayment. He used both words and then corrected himself. Well, she asked to borrow it. She hasn't paid any of it back. The amounts: $800 for a car repair in September, $1,200 for what she described as a gap in her rent while she sorted out a dispute with her employer over a reimbursement, $2,000 in November that she said was for a medical bill, and $1,500 in January that she said was for a flight home to Atlanta for a family emergency. Total, $5,500. He hadn't told anyone. He'd been embarrassed. He'd also been, and this is the part that made me careful to keep my voice neutral, he'd also been hopeful. She'd talked about paying him back specifically. She mentioned a tax return. She'd mentioned a bonus she was expecting. The bonus had been smaller than expected. The tax return had gone toward credit card debt she hadn't mentioned before. There was always a reason. I said, "How are you feeling about it?" He said, "I feel stupid." I said, "You're not stupid. This is what it looks like when someone is skilled at it." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You knew. At dinner." "I knew something," I said. "Not the specifics." "The signal," he said. "Not the specifics. The signal," he said. "Yeah." He made a sound that was almost a laugh and almost something else. I did it without even thinking about it. My hand just, I felt it wrong, what she did, and my hand just did it. I asked him if I could help him think through it, not to make his decisions for him. He's 26, not 11, but to give him some framework, some perspective. He said yes. I want to be clear that what I'm about to describe is not legal advice. It's not formal anything. It's what I know from my professional background in working with people who have been in patterns of relational manipulation, and from 2 decades of listening to people describe how they got somewhere they never intended to be. What Simone had done, whether she'd done it deliberately or whether it was a pattern so ingrained she didn't fully recognize it herself, followed a specific architecture. She'd built credibility through charm and social competence. She'd gathered financial information over time, from Joel and, at that dinner, from his family, in ways that seemed conversational. She'd created a series of genuine-seeming emergencies. She'd managed his discomfort with small corrections that reframed his concern as the problem rather than the situation. And she'd kept the amounts individually small enough that each one seemed manageable in isolation. The accumulation was the trap. Any single request looked reasonable. Together, they were a pattern. Joe asked me what I thought he should do. I said I thought he had a couple of questions to answer for himself first. Did he believe, knowing what he knew now, that she was going to pay him back? And did he want to continue the relationship? He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "No, and no." I said, "Okay. Then let's talk about how to do this in a way that's clear, documented, and protects you." He asked me to be with him when he talked to her, not in the room. He didn't want that, but on the phone afterward, available. I was in my car in the parking lot of a Kroger in Dayton for an hour and a half on a Thursday evening, engine off, just waiting. He called me at 8:47. He told her what he knew. He'd told her the total. He'd asked, directly, whether she intended to repay him. He said she'd been angry at first. She'd used the word ambush, and then she'd shifted to tearful, and then she'd told him that if he really loved her, he wouldn't be keeping score. He'd said, "I'm not keeping score. I'm telling you what I lent you and asking whether you're going to pay it back." She'd left. He said she took her overnight bag. She'd already had it there, which I think she knew. I said, "How do you feel?" He said, "Embarrassed. And also kind of, I don't know, like I can breathe." I said, "That second feeling is more reliable than the first." He laughed a little, a real laugh, the kind that doesn't have anything underneath it. He consulted with a consumer rights attorney, a friend of a friend, about options for recovering the money. The attorney told him that small claims court was a realistic option for amounts in that range, though outcomes varied. Joel decided to file. I don't know how it ultimately resolved. He's asked me to let him handle that part, and I respect that. What I know is that 3 months after the dinner at Patrice's house, my son called me on a Sunday evening the way he always does, and partway through the call he said, "Hey, I've been thinking about the signal." I said, "Yeah?" He said, "I want to teach it to my roommate's little brother. He's 14 and he's got, I don't know. I just think he could use something like that, something that says there's someone who's going to notice." I didn't say anything for a second. He said, "Is that weird?" I said, "No, that's exactly what it's for. We made that signal when he was 11 because he needed to know that someone would pay attention, that no matter who was in the room, no matter what the social situation required, if something was wrong, I would feel it and I would not pretend I hadn't. The money matters." Of course it does. $5,500 matters to a 26-year-old building his life. But what I kept coming back to, in the weeks after, was that moment at the dinner table when he reached for my hand under the yellow wallpaper in my sister's dining room and pressed twice, deliberately, with the knuckle of his index finger. He was 26 years old and he still knew I would be listening. I'm his father. That's the whole job, to be the kind of person your kid still reaches for when something goes wrong, even when they're grown, even when it's been 15 years, even when the room is full of people and no one else can see. The signal worked because we made it together, not because I told him what to do, because we sat in the pizza place in Dayton on a Friday night and I took him seriously and he knew it and he remembered some things don't expire. That's the part I didn't know when we made it. I thought it was for a scared 11-year-old boy navigating his parents' divorce. Turns out it was for all of it. For every dinner table, every room full of people, every moment when something is wrong and the words aren't available yet. 2 squeezes. I would have felt them anywhere. I keep thinking about the pizza place in Dayton. A Friday night, a booth by the window. Joel, 11 years old and already learning that the world could shift under your feet without warning. He didn't ask me to fix anything that night. He asked me to pay attention. And I think about how much of parenting, how much of loving anyone, really, comes down to exactly that. Not solving, just noticing. Being the kind of person someone believes will notice. What Simone did wasn't random. People who operate the way she operated don't stumble into it. They've practiced, refined, learned which levers work on which people. She found someone decent and hardworking and a little bit hopeful, and she used all 3 of those things against him. That's how it works. It's not stupidity that makes someone vulnerable to it. It's the qualities we'd want anyone to have. The willingness to trust, to help, to give someone the benefit of the doubt. Joel wasn't naive. He was generous. There's a difference, and I want him to hold on to it. But here's what I also know. The reason it didn't go further was because Joel had something Simone hadn't accounted for. He had a 15-year-old habit of trusting his own discomfort. When something felt wrong at that dinner table, he didn't argue himself out of it, didn't tell himself he was overreacting, didn't wait until the evidence was undeniable. He reached for my hand. That instinct, the willingness to act on what you know, even when you can't fully articulate it, that's not a small thing. That's years of someone telling a kid that his gut was worth listening to. I've spent over 2 decades sitting with people who ignored that instinct, who talked themselves into staying somewhere wrong because leaving felt complicated, or because they'd already given so much, or because the other person was good at making the problem seem like their problem. The sunk cost of it. Joel got out with $5,500 gone and 7 months of his life. I know people who lost years. I know people who lost much more than money. He filed his claim. He handled it himself. I offered. He said he had it. That was its own kind of signal. Not distress this time, but the particular quiet confidence of someone who has looked at a hard thing clearly and decided to walk through it rather than around it. I won't pretend that doesn't mean something to me as his father. It means everything. What I want him to carry forward isn't bitterness about Simone, and it isn't excessive caution about the next person he meets. What I want him to carry is the understanding that his character, his decency, his willingness to trust is not a flaw. It's the whole point. The answer to being taken advantage of once isn't to become someone who can't be taken advantage of because they've stopped being open. The answer is judgment, the slow, hard-earned ability to tell the difference between someone who deserves your generosity and someone who's mistaken it for a resource. He's building that. I can hear it in how he talks now. More precise, less apologetic, still warm, but with an edge of clarity that wasn't there before. Not cynicism, clarity. Those are not the same thing, and the distance between them is exactly where I want him to live. 2 squeezes. He didn't think about it. His hand just knew. That's the thing about the values we build into our kids when they're young. They don't disappear. They go quiet sometimes. They wait. And then one day at a dinner table in Columbus, they surface exactly when they're needed. I didn't give Joel the signal. We made it together. That's the only way it works. You can't hand someone their own instincts. You can only spend enough years alongside them that they trust the ones they have.